Let's turn now to Liberal frontbencher Senator Zed Seselja for a discussion on a range of issues. Let's start with this push for the greater reform in the workplace. This is from the Australian Industry Group, and they are calling for 6 key issues to be dealt with. More clarity basically underpins what they want, Senator. Will the government be responding favourably?
Well, good morning, Kieran and Elise. The Prime Minister has asked Christian Porter to look at issues in the workplace and the fundamentals around that are that workers will be properly looked after, that it will be fair to workers, that it will be evidence-based and that we will ensure that it has genuine and measurable improvements in productivity. So those are the fundamentals when it comes to looking at changes to the workplace. We've obviously got some on the table in dealing with militant unions right now and ensuring that we have unions who obey the law, not serial law-breaking unions, and that they aren't able to continue to do what we've seen groups like the CFM MEU do over many, many years. So there's reforms on the table and Christian Porter on behalf of the government is looking to the future, but the Prime Minister has made it very clear what the parameters for that will be.
We just had Amanda Rishworth from Labor on a short time ago, and she was saying that some of these measures could actually be counterproductive for the economy, in particular ones that increase job insecurity and make things harder for workers in that sense. Do you agree with that sentiment?
Well, the coalition government has no intention of making things harder for workers. We have an intention of making things better for workers. More jobs, which is what we've delivered in recent years and what we want to continue to deliver. And all of our plans for the economy, and of course we've just returned money to workers through large tax cuts that we've just legislated. So all of our plans are about making things better for workers, making businesses more profitable, better conditions for workers, higher wages over time, but of course higher wages underpinned by a sustainable economy and by sustainable productivity growth is the best way of delivering for workers, because that way you can ensure that it's sustainable and that you don't have one worker's improved conditions taking the job of another worker. And that's always the balance you seek to strike. But we're very welcoming of industry engaging in the discussion, putting forward ideas. We won't necessarily accept everything that they put forward, but we're certainly keen to listen and engage with them in a really constructive manner.
On Mr Porter's review of the system, likely to take up to 9 months, that would leave plenty of time to legislate before the 2022 election. Can the government make some changes here that don't necessarily need to be taken to the people if there is enough consensus through these consultations?
Well, look, let's wait and see, but we've got those foundational principles, which is we want to see workers protected, we want to see it being evidence-based, we want to see that there'll be improvements through any changes that might be proposed. So we're taking a very cautious and objective approach here. As I say, we'll work with industry, we'll listen to various stakeholders in this discussion, and at the end of it, hopefully we can come up with some good proposals. And what we do with those will be a matter for Christian Porter at the end of that process and ultimately for the government. But it is important that we continue for looking at ways that we can reform the economy, improve the economy. We've done a lot in that space. We're cutting taxes, we're cutting red tape, we're building more infrastructure, we're working on a skills agenda. There's a whole range of things we're doing. Small business tax cuts are flowing right now and will continue to reduce over the next couple of years. So there's a lot that we have done and much more that we want to do to improve the economy and continue to grow jobs and make the lives of Australians and the livelihoods of Australians better in the future.
In a similar vein, we understand Christian Porter is this week out consulting with backbenchers about religious freedoms and in particular trying to find some consensus within the party there. What legislative measures, if any, could be agreed on when it is such a contentious issue, and we have seen that there has been so much debate about what you could actually do by law to protect religious freedoms?
Well, a couple of things. One, I'm a big supporter of religious freedom, and the government, very pleasingly, I think, has taken a strong policy to the election to legislate for a Religious Discrimination Act or an act of that sort that would protect freedoms. Now, this is a fundamental freedom. I'm a big believer, the Liberal Party and the National Party are big believers in freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, freedom of association. These are foundational. And so, but implicit in your question, I guess, is that it is difficult to get the balance right, or I think explicit, and it is. There is no piece of legislation that can fix every issue where there will be conflict in the community. But we do believe that making meaningful and substantial changes in this space is warranted. Now, exactly what that will look like will be fundamentally, the job of Christian Porter to lead, and he's doing that in his usual very professional way of consulting with colleagues, consulting with various people in the community, and ultimately he would hope, and I know that Prime Minister and the government would hope, that what we would see is something where we're able to have meaningful discussions with the opposition, the Labor Party as well, because we don't want to see religious freedom, the issue of religious freedom being a political plaything, ideally, and I think those who support it would want to see that we can come to a landing point that both sides of politics can agree on.
It is intensely complex, though, isn't it, at various points where one freedom intersects with another. For example, just looking at this fifth point from the industry group today, which wants unfair dismissal and adverse action laws to be reviewed so that employers aren't left open to potentially crippling compensation claims. And I guess that could be seen in the context of the rugby matter and the contract which was entered into by the individual, which has caused so much of this debate to erupt.
Yeah, well, look, that's one way of looking at that. I hadn't looked at that particular proposal in those terms. But, of course, that is the great challenge of politics, and what we're elected to do is to find a way through that brings the community with us, that makes improvements. And I guess you look at what are the issues, what are the problems? Well, there are certainly many in the community who believe that there are people of faith being persecuted in one form or another because of their faith. Now, I think we still enjoy largely great freedom in this country. We are very blessed to live in Australia, where we do enjoy freedom of speech and freedom of religion, freedom of enterprise, freedom of association. These are great things, and most countries don't have it. We need to continue to work to ensure that that is the case in the future, and where there are conflicting views in the community, we need to find a way that brings people along with us. But it is a foundational principle for us. It's a strong commitment from the Prime Minister down that we will get some meaningful reform in this space, but I'm not going to preempt exactly what that will look like, because there is a process to go through.
And just in a slightly different topic than what we're probably used to discussing, but we do see that there's this Chinese warship that's come down observing our military war games, and it does seem like it is trying to spy on Australian ships. Do you think this is the new normal, or could we be doing more as a country to try to counter the threat from China?
Well, look, certainly the Defence Department and the government is aware that there may well be interest in these kind of very important military exercises from other countries, and sufficient planning is done by the Defence Department, by the military, to take account of those factors. But in terms of the actions of other countries, on the movements in international waters of Chinese vessels, that's really a matter for the Chinese government.
Zed Seselja, Minister, thank you very much for that. We'll talk to you next week.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.